Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few moments. We subscribe to theater time here, so we start about 2 minutes a little late. Just everybody get into our Zoom platform. So if you just want to hang on a minute, we'll be starting very soon. Thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Michael Ibrahim, and I'm the program manager with the Cultural Investment Portfolio at the Mass Cultural Council. The Cultural Investment Portfolio's focus is grants and services for nonprofit cultural organizations, and we are super excited today to deliver a workshop to you on how to motivate and support board members remotely. This workshop is part of the Mass Cultural Council's Recover, Rebuild, and Renew efforts to help organizations come back from COVID-19. Over the next 5 months, we are offering 2 free workshops per week in the areas of financial management, legal issues, human resources, advocacy, management, and board governance, what we're here to talk about today. We wanted to start off with board governance because success to recover from COVID requires a strong partnership between staff and board governance is often overlooked in this process. Joining us today are our friends from Arts Extension Service in Amherst, Lisa Williams and Dee Boyle-Clapp. We also have some special guests today from our field. David Sneed, Executive Director of Handel and Haydn Society is here today, and Bill Vayette, Executive Director of the Northeast Document Conservation Center, and also a board trustee, is going to be with us to talk about their experiences on supporting board members remotely during COVID. So we are happy to have both of them here. While we will do introductions in just a moment, I'm going to give a few ground rules. As you probably noticed, this session has automatic captioning. If that's a distraction for you, you can minimize that or get rid of it. But we want to make sure that our materials are accessible to as many folks as possible. Auto-generated captions are provided on all Mass Cultural Council Zoom meetings and webinars. If you need additional accommodations in the future, like ASL, please let us know when you register and we'll make that available for you. We will actually have time for Q&A throughout this presentation. We don't have to wait to the very end, but we are going to use the Q&A function, not the chat, but the Q&A to ask questions. And when you have questions, since we have a full house today on our panel, it would be great if you wanted to direct your conversations to either our special guests, our organizations, or our consultants from Arts Extension Service, just so we can facilitate that. This session is being recorded and will be available on the Mass Cultural Council's YouTube channel afterwards. Since you've registered and I have your email addresses, you will get an email from me when this is ready. And in addition, Lisa and Dee's content will be emailed to you as well, so you'll be able to grab that. My colleague Kaylin King is here on the call, and she will be providing some resources as we go along in the chat box. This session will run for about 90 minutes, including time for Q&A. But first, before we get going, we do have a special guest here. Joining us is Michael J. Bobbitt, the new Executive Director of Mass Cultural Council. And Michael, I'm going to bring you in. If you wanted to say a few words, we are all yours. Perfect.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to see all these names and such. Thank you, Michael and Kaylin, for letting me Zoom bomb your webinar. And hi to Bill and Dee and David and Lisa as well. And a special shout out to Barbara, our council member. I just wanted to pop in and say hi. I'm going to listen for a little bit and then go have lunch since I haven't had lunch yet. This is day 4, and I have been absorbing a lot of information and getting to meet lots of people and trying to reread my notes, which is a little impossible because my handwriting is atrocious. But I'm really happy to be here, and I can't wait to meet you all in person. And I hope you enjoy the webinar today, and we'll see you on the loop at some point.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Okay, so at this point, I would love to introduce our special guest today, and I will kick it off to Dee Boyle-Clapp. Oh, Dee, I think you're muted. We're in that world.
Sorry, yeah, I know. My phone was ringing. Hi, I'm Dee Boyle-Clapp. I'm the Director of the Arts Extension Service. Briefly, what we are is a national arts service organization located at UMass. We serve the arts through education, through resources, through publications, consulting, and presentations like the one today. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Dee. Lisa.
There I am. Okay, I am Lisa Williams. I am a faculty member at the Arts Extension. I teach lots of different things. I've been working in the field of nonprofit management for about 40 years. And one of my particular interests is board work and how the governance of any organization works impacts everything. So I'm delighted to be able to talk with you about that today.
Great. We're so happy to have you both here. And of course, from our field, I would love to welcome David Sneed.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks for coming today. So I'm the CEO of the Handel and Haydn Society. We are an orchestra and chorus that specialize in music of the Baroque and classical periods. We give a 9-week season of 19 concerts in normal times at Symphony Hall and Jordan Hall. It's great to be here.
Thank you, David. And finally, we've got Bill Viette. Bill.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Viette. I'm the Executive Director of the Northeast Document Conservation Center. We're located in Andover, been here since 1973, and we specialize in conserving paper-based materials for libraries, archives, museums, and historical societies, not just in Massachusetts, but throughout the country. And I'm also serving right now as a trustee at Historic Deerfield, and I look forward to chatting with you.
Thank you, Bill. And with that, we'll just hand it over to Dee and Lisa. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just going to kick us off for a second, then I will hand it over to Lisa. What we're going to do today is kind of different. We're going to actually have a combination of presentation, Q&A, and then go back to presentation. So it's a little bit of a different and more unique layout today. So Lisa, I'm going to hand it right over to you.
Yes, indeed. And thank you for all of the participants and for Mass Cultural Council for making this happen. And as Dee said, we're going to have basically 3 sections today. And after each of those sections, we will have a discussion with our panelists and a Q&A. So if you have questions, be prepared and we'll get to them in real time. Next slide. Okay, unprecedented. This is officially the word for the year for 2020. And I'm sure all of you in the nonprofit world agree that the word aptly describes everything you've been through. The array of unprecedented challenges is almost infinite, but many center on the role and functioning of the board. We may be inclined to panic when you look at disrupted meeting protocols and distracted board members. But in fact, our collective toolbox has a lot of what we need to make this not only a good response to the unexpected demands, but really a way of catapulting our organizations into a successful future. Atypical boards of various kinds have always done things differently, from remote board meetings to organizations whose boards are scattered all over the country, to amped up communications for organizations that have board roles that are more in the sort of ambassador kind of category. We can learn from those examples. In addition to that, our technological world offers an amazing assortment of relevant tools, although not necessarily things that we would have used in normal times, but they're out there. And then finally, we're a creative community. If there are problems, we will find solutions. Next. Throughout our discussion today, there are three key considerations to keep in mind. These are things that are not specific to any given problem, but underlie everything that we do. And as we make decisions, these are the things we need to think about. First, what are your organization's priorities? Why are you there? What's your mission? What are your immediate priorities in a practical sense? Second, who are your board members? A board that consists largely of 30-year-olds is going to have a real different dynamic than a board consisting largely of 60-year-olds. A board consisting of people who all live in the same neighborhood is going to be really different from one where the board members are scattered all over the country. There are all manner of distinctions from board members and from boards, one to another. And you need to know your board, think about your board. And then finally, what does your community need? And this is something that we sometimes lose track of in normal times. We just do what we do. We follow our mission and the community profits from it. These are not normal times. So even though there are things that we might not have considered about our communities, the needs may be real and pressing and different. And we need to keep that in mind as we go forward. Next. Our first big challenge, board meetings. A board has to continue meeting in compliance regardless. The bylaws of every organization, as well as the regulations imposed as part of achieving nonprofit status, have specific requirements for meetings and for board functioning in other ways. All the same, board meetings need not look as they've always looked. They can be restructured. They can be restructured to meet the needs of the organization, which may be different than they would have been under normal circumstances, as well as to meet the needs of the board members who are participating. And they can also be adapted to maximize efficiency and impact in a time when inefficiency seems to be the name of the game. The limitations that we have don't take away the governance requirements of boards. They don't take away the logistical management requirements of boards. The financial statements have to be reviewed no matter what. Policies have to be approved. Staff oversight has to go on. And all of those things are kind of, not as they normally would be at this point. And you need to make changes to make that work. Next. Massachusetts adopted COVID-specific regulations to provide organizations with maximum flexibility at this point. There are numerous provisions. They cover a very wide range of function, but the key elements allow all boards to meet and vote remotely, regardless of their bylaws. Some bylaws will indicate that remote meetings are not acceptable or that they're set up very specific rules for them. Those rules would be set aside for the period that this regulation is in place. And it also allows organizations to retain a full slate of board members, even if normal term limits and recruitment strategies are limited. The regulations themselves are time delimited. They are linked to the official state of emergency, and that plus 90 days, I believe it is. And so it's important to pay attention. If this is not something that you can do differently, hopefully not next year, and figure that your bylaws don't matter anymore, you may have to revise the bylaws or whatever after this regulation expires. So pay attention. And in general, it's important to review the statutes before making decisions. The reading list from this session does provide a good summary of the provisions, so look that over and proceed accordingly. Next. Thank you. Technology offers some wonderfully comprehensive tools for boards to use, many of which are particularly relevant when normal is no longer an option. The readings that we have today include a portal so that will allow you to look at some of the principal board management software that's out there. There's no point in, there's a number of them. There's no point in going over them in any detail during this session, but there's some really good stuff out there. You can explore them in detail on your own time. At the same time, that depending on your board, a high-tech solution, even a really good one, may not be the best strategy for you. Many organizations are better served with a combination of more familiar options, including obviously Zoom, Google Drive, Basecamp. Some of the simple familiar tools can be very useful. You also have to keep in mind that tech of any sort may not be great for some of your board members. There are people who serve on our boards who have no easy access to computers or no easy access to Wi-Fi. There are obviously people who, because of physical limitations or of one sort or another, find particular applications difficult. It is essential to ensure that all voices are heard, and therefore it's essential to remain open to the need for individual accommodations. And this may mean, depending again on your board, structure things in a way for everybody that's more accessible. It may mean making individual accommodations, but the voices are what you're there for. And if any individual voice is not going to be heard in a particular approach, that may not be the approach for you, for your group to take. Next, please. Bottom line here is that more customization means more effectiveness. How have your board members' lives changed? You know they have. A board member with children who are now suddenly at home all day may prefer meeting later at night after their children in bed. On the contrary, somebody who is no longer in a hands-on work role in the daytime might prefer meetings at that time. People find they have more interest in time for an interpersonal, interactive kind of work. Other people prefer individualized tasks that can be done on their own schedules. You have to think about your board and who your people are. Don't assume this. You don't know what people are facing in their real lives. You just know that there's stuff out there. So to have a dialogue that engages all of the board, frankly, honestly, and empathetically, to ascertain what people's real challenges are, what their real interests are, how they would like the board to work. Schedules can be adjusted. Meetings can be changed. Meeting times can be changed. Meeting duration can be changed. And the work will get done if people are on board to do it. It's important to note, though, that you might not find a solution that fits everybody. It is possible that you will lose a board member as part of this process. That's okay. Part ways, empathetically, cheerfully, encourage the departing individual to rejoin when circumstances change. Fill the vacant seat promptly, perhaps with somebody who is a previous board member or a community member who already knows your organization well, so there's not a lot of ramp up time. And obviously keep in touch with the departing board member, but it's okay. I've talked to several people in management positions who are feeling quite a lot of anxiety that one board member is left behind in all of this. And I feel that guilt, and yet it's bound to happen. It's okay. These are not normal times. Just, stay friends and stay supportive. That is a quick version of how we can deal with meetings in the ongoing world. Again, your readings are great on this. Do look at them. But I will now turn over to Dee for some discussion with our panelists, and then we'll address some questions that you have. And at this point, if you have questions specifically about meetings, we'd love to respond to any particulars that you may be thinking about.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. That was great. So as Lisa just said, if you've got anything you want to share in the chat or in the Q&A, definitely do it. And also, as Michael had said, please also, if you have a specific question for either Lisa or for one of our panelists, that would be awesome. So first, I just want to say thank you to MCC, Mass Cultural Council, for, Michael, for identifying and inviting our panelists today. It was really helpful and we really appreciate it. So I'm going to first turn to David and ask you a question. When we had a chance to talk, I was actually quite surprised. David, you have a substantially sized board. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could, especially compared to other nonprofits, I'm wondering if you could just share a bit about your board. And then what, as CEO of Handel and Heiden, did you do to change your board meetings due to the pandemic?
Well, we have two boards. We have a board of governors and a board of overseers. We're changing that name the next meeting, I think, to advisors. Total about 75 people. And the quarterly meetings have both groups gathered together, which is a challenge. Even in person, it's a challenge. And so the ways that we've changed the meetings, first of all, we made them shorter, 90 minutes instead of 2 hours. We've made them much more, I think, interactive and engaging. It used to be just 2 hours of reports, death by PowerPoint. And so now we've broken the meetings up into two parts, made them shorter, 90 minutes. Part one is presentation of a topic. Yesterday, it was about a market research we've done on audiences of color. That then led to breakout rooms and discussions. It came back from that. We took a 5-minute break. Then there was a presentation about our digital activities, 15-minute discussion about that, came back, talked about it. And that was the meeting. So it's no longer just report. They really have been rejiggered to be much more actually engaging and interactive, which is kind of ironic. You think about the fact that we couldn't actually get together. I consulted with my new board chair, Rob Shapiro, about this topic, and he couldn't be here because of a schedule conflict, but he sent me an email, and I'd like to just share it with you if we have like a minute now for that. That's okay with you.
Go ahead, just real quick. Yeah.
All right. So Rob said, a different contrarian point of view. He says, I think the topic potentially misses the bigger point of board engagement in general. We don't engage board members, in my view, simply because we can meet in person when that is possible. In-person meetings can be boring and unengaging, just as remote meetings can be gripping and involving. It depends on the subject and the syncopation of the meetings and the size of the group and the opportunity to have meaningful participation and a sense that one's contributions matter. It goes on, but I'll just stop at that. So he sees opportunity in this new world, which I think is interesting.
That's wonderful. That'll actually really segue well into the next segment. So fantastic. Thank you so much. So Bill, I really just want to emphasize again that you really wear two hats. So, you're a CEO or you're an ED and. So first, from the perspective as the ED at Northeast Document Conservation Center, what changes did you make to your board meetings? And if we have time, is there anything that you want to share that happened with Historic Deerfield?
Sure. Well, we kept the same number of meetings with the exception of our retreat. We felt that the retreat needed to have some free-flowing conversation, and because we weren't that comfortable with Zoom yet, that Zoom wasn't going to accommodate that. But if this goes on much longer, we're going to end up having to learn how to do retreats by Zoom. So we kept the number of meetings the same. We've moved to Zoom like everybody else. The content of our meetings has always been part pro forma, reviewing minutes and financials, but also part discussion. So the meetings always were a little bit lively in that regard anyway. And we've been able to, use Zoom or keep that liveliness going with Zoom. One interesting thing is that we've had some difficulty with attendance with meetings. We have some board members who are not from Massachusetts, and sometimes travel can be a problem. Attendance has been perfect because there's no excuse, as long as your internet's working. Especially good for committee meetings. And in fact, because Zoom is actually working so well, we've decided that rather than reserve a December and February snow day for those meetings, we're just going to do them by Zoom if it snows in the future. And we're also just going to do all committee meetings by Zoom rather than drag everybody here. So I think there are some silver linings to this pandemic forcing us into new technologies. From a historic Deerfield standpoint, very different paradigm. At NEDCC, our board members are mostly professionals who are either still in the field or retired librarians and people who run museums and whatnot. At the Historic Deerfield, they're more like a traditional museum board, a lot of private people with deep pockets who are just passionate about the mission. And so their meetings are 2-day affairs with a dinner. And it's a super engaged board. And it's hard to replicate that with Zoom, but they did do some, have been doing some social activities through Zoom, which has worked pretty well and it's been a decent proxy. A couple of things the board's engaged in. One is kind of been put a little bit on hold as a capital campaign, because it's hard to engage people through Zoom that way for big donations. And we're also doing a CEO search at Historic Deerfield. And there, my advice for anybody who's facing that kind of thing, we almost didn't do it because of the pandemic. And we're so happy we just dived in the deep end of the pool and did it, because it's going fine. It's this new logistical paradigm isn't bothering anybody. And in fact, in some respects, it's easier because there's no travel involved. So coordinating schedules is super simple. And we're not through the whole process yet. So, you know, it remains to be seen. But I think a lesson here is don't be scared. Just keep on doing your mission. You've got to do your mission.
Great. Thank you so much. So Michael, we might have time for just one question if you have one from the Q&A.
I don't have any questions yet. So
Okay.
a reminder, if anybody wants to ask a question, just put it in the Q&A and we'll be sure to put it up.
Great. I'm going to mute myself and be quiet and then go back to the next thing. Lisa, I'll give it back to you. Thank you both.
All right, on to the next slide. And one back. Nope, wrong way. That way, there we go. Okay. Okay, so our second big challenge is engagement. You never think to ask in normal times, but why are your board members involved with your organization? What do they get out of it? In order to ensure board engagement at a time when our routines are disrupted, you have to think about why they're there. Some of the motivating factors that are quite common, like programming. Everybody's excited to get the show out there, to get the, you know, to feel that they had a part in making this conversation, to this seminar, this performance. When there's not a seminar and there's not a performance and there's people can't go to the exhibit, how does the board member get involved? There are many board members who are engaged because of social interaction with other board members and with members of the community that are come in through the door of that organization, and that those social engagements are limited. There are all kinds of things that motivate a board. They vary widely. You need to know what is motivating your board. It's not going to be one thing, it's going to be several. But I'm going to look today at a couple of the factors that are common and how we can adapt to ensure ongoing long-term commitment. Next slide, please. First of all, programs. As I said, you know, how many of your board members are there because they just love knowing that they're a part of putting on the show, whatever the show might be. And, you know, we all know what it's like when we're not able to do the normal show thing. So engage the board in looking for options. The options may be technology, the options may be collaboration, the options, some of the things that you know, even small performing organizations are doing these days are mind-blowingly creative. I mean, you know, having the choir in the parking lot kind of thing. There's all sorts of good stuff out there, but your board cares. They like this, they value this. They're the perfect people to be involved in the brainstorming of how you can continue offering the programs that you're so proud of in a time when normal is just not an option. The question of revisiting past successes is an interesting one to me, because you don't want to focus on the past. We're focusing on the present, which is pretty darn demanding, as well as on the future. And yet, I think to remind board members that of the exciting things that have been done. And that might mean, showing a video of a show that you did last year at one of your board meetings, something, there's all sorts of possibilities, but to make them actively realize that this is an ongoing thing and that where you were is still who you are, even if you're not able to operate in the same kind of way right now. Collaborations can be key. And we will hear the word collaboration repeatedly during this presentation today. There are opportunities to share with other organizations, and that can be something big. That can be looking at a peer organization in one way or another and planning some long-term something so that the programming may not happen during the pandemic, but you got a great plan that's going to manifest itself, a year from now. Or it might be collaborating in a small kind of way, looking at, how you can work with a local school in a remote kind of way, so that some of your artists, for example, are mentoring homeschooling students. I've talked to a number of organizations who have done something like that. That it's, keep in mind throughout that there are long-term possibilities built into this. What you do today may seem wonky and not at all like what you're expecting to be doing as an organization. But what kind of doors does that open to the future? They're true, they're there. And you might find a whole new path, a whole new road that your organization is interested in exploring. Next, please. If your board members are motivated by the impact on the community, collaborations will be key. Just like we don't think too much about board motivations, we don't really think too much about what the community needs. You do your thing, the community benefits, everybody's happy. The community may need different things at this time than in the past. So explore. Board members typically have great connections. That's one of the reasons they're good board members, is that they're ambassadors. So use those board connections. First, to assess what the community needs, and then second, to explore the outreach possibilities that might help you to meet those needs. Even if the focus is on addressing short-term problems, again, keep in mind, you're building a collaborative infrastructure that can be hugely valuable in the long term, in small ways and in large ones. It's a way of building your community, bringing your community together, building a tighter, mutually supportive environment, not just within the arts, I'd like to point out. I think that those of us who are operating in the arts world can kind of have tunnel vision as far as the relationships that we have. But the guy who is running the food bank may be a great collaborative partner for some of the programming that you're interested in doing. I mean, education is an obvious connection. So, look at the community as a whole. And finally, celebrate together. Progress in adversity is a fabulous way to build relationships, to build trust, to have a sense that we're all in it together. And if there's anything that people need right now, it's things to celebrate. So to allow your board to run with it. Look for the successes. Look for the fun things that we can all do together, and bring the community into a process where everybody's feeling good about who you are together. Next, please. And finally, if the motivation for many of your board members is the personal relationships within the board and the relationships with the community that their board role brings to them, this can be a terribly frustrating time. As we've just said, meeting strategies, the example that Bill gave of his organization is a great example of this. You can revisit how your meetings work in a way that makes people more interactive, that underscores the personal relationships that are critical to a comrade-oriented kind of board. You can have briefer agendas, more frequent meetings, more time for board socializing. Virtual social events, which would any of us have believed that this was a thing, a year or two ago? But they can be tremendously satisfying. I'm sure you all know people who are on a virtual social event, Zoom, 2 or 3 times a week, and that has become their social world. I always encourage a board, and this is not just in trying times, but in general, a board to have at least a person, and under the circumstances, probably a task force that focuses on board satisfaction, and to look at bringing together a group of people whose job is to find ways to make the board feel good about it themselves. Create all sorts of opportunities for getting together, for thinking smart about the organization sometimes, but also for just being. The personal relationships, as we are all learning, can be maintained in difficult times, but it's not something that may happen automatically. You may have to have an actual committee in charge of, engagement sounds kind of dry, but in special events, fun things, board togetherness. It's important. And I think we are now going back to Dee and our panelists for further thoughts on engagement. And again, questions that you have, please submit them and we'll be happy to talk.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate that. You brought up so many interesting points, and we'll have some more time at the end, but I really do want to encourage anybody who's on the call, if you're not multitasking and aren't even listening, think about what questions you might have, or if we have time, I'd love to hear some of your ideas as we go along as well. So I'm going to turn to Bill first. So if you want to turn yourself back on, Bill. First, how large is your board? And where do you see the majority of your board sort of fit into those buckets that Lisa had talked about of motivation, either programs or community impact or personal relationships? Or really, is there a bucket that's unique to your organization or one that we haven't quite covered? So what are those buckets and what are those boards? Where does your board fit? And also then how does COVID change your engagement with your board in those areas?
So at NEDCC, we have a board of directors rather than a board of trustees. At Historic Deerfield, of course, is trustees. There are only 15, so it's manageable. And it's also a board that does it. It's not a giving board either. So they're there for their judgment and their experience so that they can help us set some policies. They're all there because of the mission, really. So, I think we would fit in the program bucket. For us, a program isn't, performing arts or something like that. It's conserving materials that are in collections, imaging them, that kind of thing. So, we were able to get back to work in phase 1, which makes it a little bit easier from an board engagement standpoint, because we're actually doing our mission and after the shutdown. The way that we've increased engagement, though, is through basically increasing communication. And in addition to kind of the normal reports that we were providing the board, the pro forma stuff, we've just started to do these news flashes, and not to annoy them, but just to give them, share with them little victories. Like when the first project started rolling in after the shutdown, somebody signed a contract, we just send a little news flash out to the board saying, well, projects are starting to roll in, those kinds of things. We also we're relating the news to what they're hearing about in the media. So if they're hearing about PPP loans, they're hearing about restrictions, on businesses, they're hearing about, FMLA parental leave, benefits and those kinds of things. As those things I immediately let them know how we fit into that paradigm, and so that they're comforted that we're benefiting from some of these relief bills that are being passed, and we're on it. So that's good. That keeps them engaged. And then finally, we have a really interesting staff here. They're very diverse, and when we were shut down, we started a page on our website called the NEDCC Staff at Home page, where we would post pictures. So initially there were pictures of sourdough bread and kittens. And but then people started posting audio clips of, you know, things they were singing with a guitar and stuff like that. So the board caught wind of this because of my little communications with them, and they asked if they could be, you know, have access to that. And they also wanted access to my daily communications with the staff. So that was very welcome. And so now they're kind of getting to know our staff personally by virtue of, you know, me sharing these things with them that have nothing to do with, you know, our business, so to speak. But it makes them feel closer to the organization, but more importantly, the people. And Historic Deerfield, basically I served on a number of boards over the years, museum boards. This is the most engaged board I've ever served on. To me, I was convinced that no pandemic was going to stop this board from being engaged. So it really hasn't been an issue for them. The board chair is fantastic. He's really personalizing things during the pandemic, and he lives on this gentleman's farm out in Wisconsin and has peacocks and sheep and stuff like that. He's sharing photos of all these things regularly, and we continue to recruit board members. So the point here is that the world hasn't stopped. It might feel like it, but life goes on. So there's something cathartic about bringing new board members on, even though we haven't met them. And so I would encourage people to not stop recruiting board members. Keep on going.
That's great. That's great. I actually did have to say that I did go to your website and I checked a couple of those posts out from your staff, and they were really fun. It's like they really got into it. So that's really cool. And also Lisa and I both laughed because I live on a farm and I have peacocks and a whole host of weird animals too. So yeah, it must be something from about Wisconsinites because I'm from there. So wow. With that, David, I'm just going to switch to you. So you have like a really significantly large board, and I'm sorry to put on that, but it just struck both Lisa and I as like, wow, it's hard enough to manage 12, 15, 20 people on a board, but so many, and also multiple boards. So no doubt, you have more variety of like which buckets your folks will fit in, and they probably overfill all of these various buckets. But I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about, more of your board engagement challenges and how you have met some of those in either these particular areas or something that we did not cover.
Sure. Well, first of all, I don't live on a farm, so that I start off with a disadvantage there. I agree with a lot of what Bill said about there being opportunities for more engagement. First of all, as he said, geography kind of goes away. When we met in person at the Peru, we'd have about 40, 45 people at a meeting, which is still huge. But now you've got 75 board members at every meeting. And, through the breakout room process and discussion topics, we're able to engage them, I think, much more than we did before. As I think I said before, the meetings are shorter and they're more frequent. We used to meet quarterly. Now we get together every 6 weeks. So the meetings are more focused and shorter and concentrated. I think also, our artistic director lives in London. He did not come to a lot of meetings, and now he's there. And a lot of our musicians live in New York and elsewhere, and they can perform in a meeting. So we're really taking advantage of the evaporation of geography that Zoom offers.
That's great. I love it. And also just want to, underscore what your board member had said in the email earlier, or his letter to you. So the fact that they would even write a letter in response just shows like a depth of engagement and caring, which I think is just amazing. So thank you for that, both of you. Want to add another thought? Yeah, go ahead.
Something else Bill mentioned was more frequent communication. We do that too. Mm-hmm. I really found that I started doing more longer memos, page and a half, 2 pages of things we're working on. And they actually are more up to date now than they were before when I would wait for the meeting to give that information.
No doubt. Oh, that's great. Great. Thank you so much. Michael, is there anything that you want from the Q&A? Quiet group today?
We do have a couple questions, so I'd love to put them in. And then we may also save some of it for the end while we get your last bit of topic. But I think this was Bill. You talked about the difference between Board of Trustees and Board of Directors, I think, in your statement. And so we have a question on how do you consider the difference between those two terms?
Well, I know there's a legal difference, and I'll attempt that, but if there's any lawyers in the audience, they should jump in and correct. But my understanding is that Board of Trustees actually has some financial responsibility for the organization, and you know, the last dollar, so to speak, you know, they're there to bail it out. Board of Directors is there for oversight. Major responsibilities are hiring the CEO and setting policy. So a little bit different. You know, also it's less common for a board of directors to be, you know, making financial donations, whereas that's you know, at least half the battle with a board of trustees.
And can I say something? Yeah. In practice, in organizations, the distinction between a board of directors and a board of trustees is as muddy as anything could possibly be. The boards of directors that will tell you their job is not to raise money are going to get pushback from, well, executive directors all over the place, and as well as, you know, these are not distinctions that are adhered to rigidly. Technically, that is totally true, but just because they call you a director, don't expect them not to ask for money. That's kind of what I'm saying here.
Great.
Thank
We
you.
have time for another one.
Thank you. I have one more I can put out here. So this person writes and says the organization that they work for has adapted to the crisis, as we've all done. And so some of their offerings and some of their programs are different. So sometimes they've moved away from subscriptions and they're focusing on selling something else or offering something else. And so they think that'll probably be part of their work after COVID is done. So really kind of adapting their business model after this. But they're finding that some of their trustees aren't really liking the new direction, some of the new programming. It's not kind of what they signed on for. It doesn't really kind of resonate with them. So do you have any thoughts on talking about how this new work is important to the mission of the organization to folks that might be a hardliner in their vision of what the organization's program should look like?
Great. Was that directed to anybody specific, Michael? Sorry.
Anybody who wants to go there.
Go. Yeah.
I'm inclined to think that we're going to see quite a lot of that. And probably it will be okay. There will be board members who find that they are no longer aligned with the mission or other factors of an organization as you go forward. There will also be new potential board members, and this gets into what we're talking about in the last third of this presentation. There will also be new board members who will come on board because those new initiatives really resonate with them. It's going to take a while to shake out. I think that some of the people who are current board members who are just like, well, we've always done it this way, are eventually going to come around. Rarely will an organization be totally black and white. The change is not going to be that dramatic. It's going to be more of this and less of that, perhaps, but still some of both. But it's, as I said earlier, don't feel bad if you lose a board member. People come and go for their own reasons. They have their own motivations. They have their own, their own values. And that doesn't mean the organization is doing anything wrong. That's kind of what I say is a conclusion. Good.
Either of you two folks?
Well, I guess I wasn't clear. The questioner, it sounded like were they changing their mission? Because that would lead to some dissonance. But our case at H&H, in fact, the mission really drove our conversion to online and digital delivery of that mission. Our mission, as we say, is to inspire the intellect, touch the heart, elevate the soul, and connect us all with our shared humanity through the performance of music. It intentionally doesn't say our mission is to give concerts. Right. So, for us, we just used that mission statement to direct how we were going to create an online world of H&H content. And so there's been no disconnect at all. So I guess I'm not that helpful to the question because we didn't change what we did. We just changed how we delivered it.
Yeah, I would say that there wasn't anything in here about mission change. And, we at the council talk with organizations all the time about a good mission statement saying why you exist, not what you do.
Right.
So then your programs are what service mission. And so I think at this point, it's easier for board members to take a look at programs as like the most immediate thing in front of them. And so when it shifts either platforms or disciplines or multidisciplinary or whatever it might be, sometimes that's a hard change for someone to go along with. Mission still should be the same, of course, but sometimes the vehicle or the programming itself moving along with that.
And keep in mind that there are organizations that have radically narrow missions. All mission statements don't say who you are. They do say what you do. And that is not optimal for reasons exactly like this one. You can do what you're drawn to do, what you were there to do, in entirely unconventional ways sometimes, and yet that's not reflected necessarily in formal mission statements. So the expectation of people who are looking at it may be narrower than we would like it to be, and maybe narrower than that of the sort of groupthink of the organization. And maybe they need to revise the mission statement along the way, not necessarily to change, but just to, David's mission statement is wonderfully broad, and indeed it opens the door for just doing anything that will advance that will touch the human heart in that kind of way. And which is great. And I think that's something that we all ought to be thinking about.
Great. Bill, did you want to add anything, or are you feeling?
I agree that, as long as you're not changing your mission just because the world's changed, then if you're delivering it differently. I mean, there are board members who are passionate about a very particular program, and they're in love with it. And if that program changes because the world's changed, that I agree with Lisa, that's unfortunate. But for them, but I would say that the ultimate test is, as long as the audiences you're serving, you're there to serve, are benefiting from that change and enjoying that change, then keep going. And if you can't convince the board member, then some other person will come along and fill their slot.
Great. This conversation reminded me of an organization that I was talking to a couple of months ago. They're a theater group, and they have switched to creating smaller performances that are basically videotaped and put up live. And they're talking about post-COVID continuing that, because they're finding that they have like more membership and more participation, because they're in a location where a lot of the folks that go to their event are kind of like summer people. So now they're able to serve them back home, and they're getting a little bit of pushback because there's that issue of quality. And yet the people who are still watching it are like, it's fine. We recognize that you're not a Broadway performance, that you're not Hamilton, so it's okay. We want to help you, and we want to see what you're doing. So adjusting people's perspectives is really, really important as well. And it's going to take a little, like I think you're right, Lisa, it's going to take some shuffling and letting all this stuff sort of sift through. There's lots going on right now, and I think keeping boards excited, but also keeping them and opening them to new possibilities is really where we're at this particular moment in time. Great. Anything else, Michael, or should we move?
I think go ahead, move on.
Great, thank you. So Lisa, back to you. I'm going to move our slides over. Great. There we go.
One more. There we go. All right, so all of which does segue beautifully into this section. Our third big challenge is, what does the future hold? I think we have a huge opportunity to make lemonade from all of these many lemons. There are silver linings all around us, and there are things that we can do that are small things. Putting out a daily newsletter, it's terrific. That will make a huge impact in the future. And then there are big opportunities to undertake projects that we would not have thought about before, to engage people in ways that we would not have thought about before. The big things and the small things are, sometimes we're not even going to know which is which, because the potential for long-term change is so vast at this moment. Next, please. The first thing is communications. And our panelists have talked about this in depth, and I agree with every single bit of it. There are new ways of communicating, doing it more frequently and with more diverse messages, things that you never thought your board would need to know. They never needed to know what your staff's cats looks like, but it makes them feel connected in meaningful ways. The frequency of communication it's so easy now, and a lot of how we have always done things has been how we've always done things since a period of time when it really was not easy at all to communicate on a day by day or even hour by hour when something exciting is going on, way with your board members or with your community as a whole. You can do it now. You can do it easily. You can do it smoothly. And we're learning that the more you talk to people, the more that they feel like they're part of the show, the more they feel committed and the more enthusiastic they are about working on your behalf. So the communications aspect of this already is showing an effect throughout the sector. And I think that we will see more and more of that. It's once people are in the habit of getting this little newsflash now and then, they're not going to give that up. Next, please. Improve your fundraising. Okay, so that sounds really counterintuitive, right? Most organizations have thought of the pandemic as a major blow to fundraising efforts, and many clearly have taken financial hits. Some have not, by the way, which is interesting. But it's not how things are now is not how things will be in the future. And I think that a lot of the changes that we have seen in organizational behavior and are seeing in organizational behavior have the potential to improve fundraising outcomes and fundraising processes in the long term. And that is despite the fact that traditional fundraising initiatives like special events and in-person asks are clearly limited right now. I laugh at Bill saying that the capital campaign is on hold because you can't ask for people for money or major gifts, at least on Zoom. And today that's true, but I'm not sure that will be true a year from now. That people are becoming so increasingly confident and comfortable in the frame of post-COVID world with these technologies that doors may be opened. First of all, the opportunities that I see, the improved communications, as we were just talking about, alone allows more people to become more familiar, to become more engaged, involved with the organization. And all of those people, in principle, I mean, if you're sending out to the community as opposed to just your board in this context, if you're communicating with lots of folks, all of those people are potential donors. Maybe some of them have been in the past. Many of them clearly have not been. And yet now they know who you are. Now they are seeing something from you all the time. Now they know what you're doing, what impact you're having. And it matters. Similarly, online programming is we were just talking about, the online programming means that people are seeing you that never saw you before. That means that the people who came to your shows in the summertime are now engaging with you even after they've gone home and are sitting in Kansas City all winter. And it's that the relationship is stronger, and that's a donor base right there. A well-deployed board has the potential to support both of those kinds of factors. Their boards, as I said earlier, are there in part, at least, because of their personal relationships, because of their role as networkers. And the kind of follow-up strengthening relationships with both potential and current donors throughout all of this is something that the board can take on. Again, it may take a task force, a special subcommittee of your development committee, I guess, that would be supportive of this. Obviously, all board members never are as comfortable as others with doing any kind of fundraising, even if it's just cultivation, not necessarily asking. And yet there will be those who are, and it's important to do that. build the networks, build the support systems, engage people, in a personal way as well as in an institutional way. Good fundraising is always all about relationships. And this is the ideal opportunity to build relationships where you haven't really had any before, and to strengthen many of the community relationships that you have. It is essential, that said, to point out that none of this will mean anything without effective follow-up. This is a groundwork that's being laid, and it is potentially a hugely strong and impactful groundwork. But if the organization reverts to traditional communications mechanisms and traditional fundraising strategies with the same prospects, the same people, the same askers, the same solicitation approach, all of this, a year from now, the opportunities will be lost. It is important to pay attention to what you have, what you're building, and to look at it as a foundation for the future, and proactively create the kinds of follow-up strategies that will make the most of that foundation over time. Next, please. Collaborations. Again, we've talked about that again and again through this presentation. Board members are key to building new relationships, to addressing the community needs. The collaborations we build have the potential to improve our communities in the long run. And the board members who play the key role in identifying those needs and in building those collaborations will be equally key in maintaining them. The many organizations will emerge from the crisis with a heightened awareness of what their community needs. And the board can take responsibility for investigating new opportunities, new initiatives, and for initiating community-focused kinds of functions. And this is kind of what we're talking about in response to the question about shifting mission. It's not necessarily a change in mission, it's a change in how mission is delivered. And the collaborative potential for that, from my perspective, is enormous. There are so many very siloed organizations that it's like, okay, I've been a consultant for decades, and working with small to medium-sized organizations in particular, there are times when you just want to shake people and say, you guys should work together. You could both achieve your mission so much better if these two organizations got together to deliver their work to the community as a joint venture. And it's a really wonderful set of possibilities. Again, follow-up is going to be necessary. You can't, that once the relationships are established in a crisis kind of environment, they will die after the crisis recedes unless someone is focusing on keeping things going. So having, again, maybe it's a task force, maybe it's just one person who's really charged up by this, but having some energy behind maintaining and building on the collaborative possibilities is going to be important. But we're all community organizations. However we define our communities, and this is not necessarily the neighborhood you live in, I'd like to say, it's also the community may be, all of the all of the arts organizations in your area. It may be, in Bill's case, you may have libraries all over the country who are part of that community, and yet you're all in it together, however you define that community. And the innovative collaborations can provide long-term mutual benefit for the organizations individually, for the collaborative partners, and for the communities as a whole. And we overlook that fact at our peril. This is a wonderful opportunity to make our communities better. Yeah, next slide. Finally, you can improve your board. I'm really optimistic that boards will be better after COVID. The people who are less committed may wander off. The people whose interests have changed may find other things they need to focus on. It's going to be, as we were talking in the last Q&A, a period of rebalancing, I believe, as we come out of this crisis. But facing our worst fears and triumphing is something we can all be proud of. And I think that boards are going to come through, organizations are going to come through with that attitude. More prosaically, the operational changes that we've made during this crisis should make almost every board more efficient and more effective. Technology will certainly help, revised meeting protocols, just listening, thinking about why board members are participating and focusing on reinforcing those values, or creating other motivations, or maybe reinforcing, developing other motivations. If most of the people are there because, and certainly we know organizations like this, because of a social interconnectedness, the board all knows each other and they've known each other for years and they always work together. Well, maybe get a little increased focus on programming that they've seen during the decision-making processes that have happened during the pandemic. Will diversify their motivations. Suddenly they're feeling really good because of their involvement in the programming part. So this is an opportunity to increase their commitment, both by reinforcing why they think they're already there, but also providing new reasons for them to believe in this organization and to want to do the work. The broader view of the board's role, which many organizations have seen and are seeing, can not only improve their effectiveness, but it allows board members to see that they matter. If a board member is leading doing a new newsletter, is initiating a collaboration with another organization in the community, they see that it matters what they're doing. They're not just rubber stamping a financial statement every month and sitting in the death by PowerPoint, as David said early on. They're accomplishing things that they can see. And in a time of instability, accomplishments are much more visible than they might be in the normal world. So again, it reinforces to the board the value of their presence. And I think that that's going to really matter in the long term. Finally, diversity, and that one may seem kind of out in left field too, but as with the fundraising, the improved communications and the increased focus on board networking has the potential to really make a difference in the pool of potential board members. There are people out there who believe in your organization enough to really knock themselves out to do the work, maybe to give the money, all of the above. And this period has given us an opportunity to find those people. In the short term, it may not transfer into increased board diversity per se, but it may mean that you have new volunteers, new committee members, new people who are participating in programming in new ways, cross-pollination with some of the collaborative partners. And that is, again, it's engagement, but it also has the potential over time to create a deep new pool of potential board members that may bring younger people, a more diverse group, people from outside your immediate communities, wherever. It will make your board a more interesting and a more dynamic community itself. Now that is the conclusion of the official part of this speech, and I will go back to Dee for more questions and for more input.
Great, thank you so much. So those of you who are still hanging in there with us, we really appreciate it. Feel free to, as Lisa just said, ask about any aspect of our topic, and give it some thought while I ask our panelists a couple of questions. So let me just pull this up, sorry. So one of the questions, one of the areas that really struck me, Lisa, when you were just talking is basically the whole idea of fundraising. Lisa and I have both taught fundraising for Arts Extension Service. She teaches it now. It was painful for me to give it up. I loved it. But as a former executive director of nonprofit organizations, motivating your board to fundraise, not during a pandemic, was always hard. So during a pandemic, I'm just wondering, David and Bill, if you could each take on that topic of how are you motivating your board members to fundraise in the middle of a pandemic? Like, what has changed for you and how are you kind of moving them forward? So I'll turn it over to either of you, whoever wants to take a stab at it first.
Well, I guess I first want to say before answering that, I want to really thank Lisa. I think there was a lot in this last section that really provoked new thinking for me. I think the idea of getting board members to collaborate was something that I haven't really focused on that much, and now I will, so I'm glad I came today. I think for us, really the volunteer leadership of the board is really leading the charge and motivating the board when it comes to fundraising. They're personally, I mentioned our board chair who's new, they're personally very engaged themselves in fundraising efforts, and I think people are following their example. So I'm not having a big issue with that at the moment.
Great.
You.
And my experience is with historic Deerfield in terms of fundraising. Again, because the NEDCC board doesn't do that. I'm kind of the fundraiser in chief at NEDCC, and our money comes mostly from foundations, not from private individuals. But at historic Deerfield, you know, kind of on two ends of the spectrum, one of our board members volunteered to see how much she can squeeze out of Giving Tuesday, and did a fantastic job, and did it all through, you know, virtually, and you know, working the board, working our social networks, and you know, exceeded the goal that she had set, you know, and the development committee had set at historic Deerfield. So you know, the pandemic didn't dissuade her or the development committee from doing that, and then using the tools that were available for that. On the other side, I think the board has just kind of looked at this situation and said, well, you know, we need to step up here and kind of fill the gap to the extent we can to keep the capital campaign going. And so, and taking advantage of some of the legislation that allowed us to accelerate some of our board gifts prior to the end of the year, you know, using retirement funds, and also just increasing our contributions. So to the credit of the Capital Campaign Committee, they weren't shy about going to the board and saying, can you help us? You've been generous. You know, pandemic only comes around once every 100 years. We promise we won't do this to you again for 100 years. Can you step up? And the board did. So I think probably the lesson here is just don't be shy when it comes to fundraising. The worst that could happen is somebody will say no. So, and the best that could happen is that it works. So I would just not be shy and just do it.
Great, that's wonderful. Excellent, good. I'm going to also just jump back to another one of Lisa's comments or points, which is the whole concept of diversity. And I know that MCC in this series is going to be taking on the DEI issues, but I'm just curious for you in terms of like motivating your board. Has your board been motivated by themselves during this moment in time to really step up in terms of its diversity? Or do you really feel like you have a diverse board in terms of, you know, race, age, ability, you know, all those different levels of what diversity is? You've both talked a little bit about geography, so you've already you know, check that one off the box. So I'll just let, you know, stop spouting and let you guys answer that.
Yeah, I guess also I've thought of a few more things. Regarding fundraising, it seems like it's easier than ever to get a meeting right now. You know, the days of trying to track somebody down doesn't happen as much these days. I also wanted to mention that I've taken to more social engagement with board members than I did before because it's easier on Zoom. My significant other and I do, you know, end of day glasses of wine with board members and their spouses a couple of times a week, and that's really, really fun and educational. Getting to diversity, I think that we're grappling with this in a major way at H&H right now. We just had a big discussion on it last night. We as an organization, I think, when concert going, you know, went down, we really took advantage of that time to make a lot of progress in creating a DEI implementation plan. So we had all the lofty goals that are in everybody's strategic plan, but to actually turn that into granular, tactical, what are you specifically going to do? We created this 63-point plan of specifics with budgets and timelines. We've been, you know, educating the board on the importance of this and the approach we're taking. The market research I talked about last night was about diverse audiences and what we learned about how to attract them to H&H. So I think that we're in a moment of really education of the board right now about the topic and the importance and the opportunity, the incredible opportunity we have to grow audiences and bringing them along, I guess is how I'd answer that.
Great, thank you.
So we're very fortunate in one regard in our field from a diversity standpoint, in that it's very heavily dominated by women. So our board is 2/3 women and 1/3 men, and our staff is even more tilted. I don't know the exact percentages, but you could count the number of men on one hand, and the other 40, are women. And I would say in terms of ethnicity, we do have representation from various groups. It probably mirrors the clients we serve. One of our challenges is that we tend to hire from library schools, art conservation programs. And so there, we depend on the makeup of the graduates that they graduate. And not everybody's attracted to our mission. It might not be as sexy as being a curator in a museum, but to be cleaning a work of art with a Q-tip, all day long. So, but it's top of mind for the board to make sure that we look like our clients. And where we've probably been most successful is we do a lot of Asian art conservation, and there's a very different ethic when it comes to conserving Asian art versus the Western ethic that we use here in the United States. And so having several Japanese and a Hawaiian native on our, not on our board, but on our staff has really helped us and has made the work that they do more authentic on those Asian works of art than someone who is trained in the Western art conservation ethic. So we have some successes there, but there's still a long way to go.
Great, excellent. Terrific. So we have a little bit more time. So I just have a couple more questions. For both of you, and Lisa, you can jump in as well, but I'm wondering if there is something that you could do in terms of like offering some advice to a potential executive director who's in the audience today. Any advice you would give to them working with their board right now in terms of motivating people, especially if it's a board that's kind of challenged right now, either financially or just because their board is, so distracted with life. Any thoughts?
I think you step into the void and lead. There's a space here now that didn't exist before between you and your constituency. I mean, physical, and you can close that space by your actions and really reaching out and engaging. I was thinking earlier that we've been talking about, how all the opportunities from this and how great everything is, but it's also true that at H&H we have a few board members who are older, who are isolated, and who are really suffering with depression. The idea of having no contact with anybody for months on end is really, really causing them to struggle in a lot of ways, including their engagement with H&H. And I think I just feel a responsibility more than ever to really understand what each board member is going through and try to reach out and help them out and keep them engaged any way I can. It's a more proactive approach, I think, than I had before. I guess that's what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful. That really makes sense. Can I just do a quick follow-up? You talked about the wine event with your partner and the board. Are you inviting everybody to come? Is it just like an open thing to everybody, or do you send reminders out each week?
Oh, we're inviting them probably 3 or 4 at a time for a week and sort of going through the list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much. Bill, how about you? Any advice you give to executive directors or to others who are leading their organizations right now, just to keep their boards moving and motivated?
I agree with David. I think in general, my observation is that boards take their cue from the CEO. And if the CEO is all in, leaning forward, and is engaged and has good spirits, they're going to have good spirits. And the opposite will be true too. So if you want your board to be looking at the world as a cup half full and as this pandemic is an opportunity, not a disaster, then you got to figure out a way of convincing yourself that it is, and then communicating to them what you're doing along those lines, to keep the organization moving forward. So it's easier said than done. There are some organizations that are just in an impossible situation where they can't get performances and they can't do anything, and they're just watching themselves go over the cliff, in slow motion. But I think keeping one's spirits up is probably the first order of business.
I agree with that with one cautionary note. I think that you have to make sure that you're leaving a safe, open space for board members to share frankly the challenges that they're facing. And some of those are going to be practical challenges, like when they can come to a meeting, that are things you need to be able to respond to. Others are just an opportunity to acknowledge that, yeah, this is rough on you, and I appreciate how hard it is for you to do the great work you're doing for us. And that board members can't be feeling so that you don't want people to feel like they can't keep up. You want them to be able to be honest and be appreciated for all they do, and not feel the guilt that they might be feeling in every other aspect of their lives these days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's really good. You're reminding me, Lisa, that, we've been so fortunate right now to have these board members and these panelists here who represent organizations that are doing well.
Yeah.
And so many organizations are not. Michael and I both teach arts management. Lisa teaches arts management. This afternoon, my students are going to be reading an article on museums and the vast number that are facing closure because they just are suffering so badly in this pandemic. So for those organizations that are really struggling, you guys have been extremely helpful because you're thinking high, which I think is really the other element as well. Yes, you have to focus on the day-to-day, but you've got to get up there and really think long-term as much as you possibly can. How are you going to keep this organization going? How are you going to keep programs going? What can you do to keep everybody motivated and engaged? So I feel like, everything you guys have touched on today, Lisa, that was great. These have all been extraordinarily helpful. So back to Michael now. Do you have questions for the group?
I do have a couple questions, and I will also say here that those of you who are with us today who might be interested, Kaylin's already got it. Thank you, Kaylin. We've got a couple sessions on the rest of our session about strategic self-care during this time. It's actually a two-parter in our HR series because most of our organizations have no human resources in arts and culture. So we're offering that some executive coaching just for executive directors who've had a lot of this weight on their shoulders, and very few people are actually checking in with our executive directors. I think those EDs on the call today can kind of feel isolated and, trying to be the cheerleader and supporting everybody else, but no one's really there for you that much. So we're going to be offering that. And also a lot of our work with the Arts and Business Council on some of those legal issues when it comes to thinking about what your future looks like in either mergers or different legal structures. And we also have a section on the essential ingredients of collaboration and partnership. We've broken that out both between the how-tos and also the financial arrangements of partnerships and collaborations, because they're really two separate things. So as Kaylin is putting a lot of links there, take a look. Send it to folks that you think might be interested, no limit. So we just wanted to share that out. I had one private message that came to me and said that actually their board has understood the fundraising necessities because of the crisis. And so it kind of takes away a lot of the gray area because we can understand it much easier. We understand the balance sheet in ways that we didn't really understand it before. We understand when you cut off a whole line of income, i.e. earned revenue, it's really hard to make that up in fundraising and contributions. So I think the message we got there is that people stepped up a lot of times during this. I wanted to go to one comment. This person is a new executive director, and they came into a board that was in a crisis pre-pandemic. So coming into this, already struggling, a lot of turnover, a lot of issues there. They are currently rebuilding the board. Do you have any advice for reinforcing the board members? Do you have any advice on how to address strategic planning needs with new board members, but not ignoring the recent history and where they've come from?
I could start, David.
Thank you.
I think the biggest challenge when you're rebuilding a new board is for those new board members to get up to speed on what the mission's all about from a mission standpoint, and what really drives the mission. There's a million programs, but there's key ones that really drive the mission. But then on the financial side, where's the money coming from? Where's it going? And what you really have to keep your eye on. There's a lot of lines on a balance sheet. They're not all equally important. Right now, during the pandemic, the cash line is probably the most important because you got to pay your staff, right? Meet payroll. That can be a challenge. So I would say when you're recruiting, make sure you're recruiting people who are interested in learning about the mission and are inquisitive, not coming in thinking they've got a bunch of answers for you. It's really important. You can't have somebody who's just fighting you all the way. They have to really be the ears open, wanting to understand this organization and its mission. And that'll make it easier to transition them in. And then don't be scared to ask a new board member to step into a role, like be on a strategic planning committee. Some fresh eyes, are good on those kinds of committees. Don't just have your seasoned board members doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I can't add to that. That was very well said. I think from when this began, we had to do both short-term and long-term thinking at the same time, because you don't have a lot of visibility to the future and what it's going to be. So we had this sort of, bifurcated, doing 2-month planning at a time and then thinking about the next year at the same time. And we've sort of been in that routine. I do think that strategic planning is important because it does connect you with the mission and the long-term vision. But somebody told me once you can't do long-range planning if you don't have a short-term plan too. So it's both.
Great. And I'd say I did get a note here to the comment about supporting each other. It is a relationship between the board and the executive director to recognize the challenges and support each other in this time. And I know we just have a minute or two left, but it would be great to hear from our two leaders here. What do you need from your board, particularly your board chair, to keep you motivated and keep you supported? So I'll just leave that for our final, kind of one of our last things. And then the last question here, how would you handle board members who may be hesitant to cultivate board and donor prospects virtually, and they may want to wait until they can return to in-person engagement?
I guess I'd say again that it's easier to get somebody on the phone or on Zoom today than it was a year and a half ago. And I tell them to take advantage of that opportunity. I do have a problem with nominating. It feels like the nominating committee is reluctant to approach people about joining until they can bring them to a concert. So we are having that discussion with the nominating committee. But I think that's what I say is it's easy now, actually, by comparison. In terms of what I need from the board, really, and I'm getting it, support, just really encouragement and just good words to just keep soldiering on is what I'm, and also financially, I mean, they're really stepping up in an inspiring way.
Yeah, I think to answer that question, what do I need out of the board? Yeah, I think I agree with David. It's always good as an executive director to have support. I don't want them to be sycophants, and just think everything that we're doing is great and never ask a question. They certainly aren't like that. We're very blessed right now that we have a board that's kind of all in and wanting to be constructive, and nobody's fighting us. So I think that's good. In terms of fundraising, I've led a capital campaign myself, and done a lot of fundraising in a prior life at the New Hampshire Historical Society. I would just match very carefully any board members with the prospective donor. And I think the one place where Zoom could work really well is we all know people who are a little bit shy. They're a little anxious around people or being in public. I think Zoom actually works better for them. And they're in the comfort of their home, and so I think you could kind of match them up with the low-hanging fruit prospects, so to speak, and don't make it any more difficult for them than they're imagining it's going to be to solicit somebody through Zoom.
Great, thank you so much. We
And
are
for cultivation
to wrap
in
up.
general, for cultivation in general, you want to make sure that your board members are telling a good story. They're not there to hammer this person for a gift right now. They're there they're selling in a positive way. And you can take away a lot of the pressure just by sort of scripting it carefully. There are people who will never be comfortable, but you can make most people comfortable if they realize that they're there to talk about something that excites them and get the other person equally excited.
Great advice.
Thank you. So that's all our time. Thank you for hanging on for the extra couple minutes here. As a house manager in a formal life, I'm kind of on time on things, so I do appreciate hanging on with us a little bit. As I mentioned before, you'll get an email with the recording of this if you want to share it out to your board members or your leadership staff, and all the great materials that have been shared and all the notes. Thank you to Kaylin, who's been putting all of that in the chat. We really appreciate it. David and Bill, we appreciate your backgrounds and your experience, and thank you for being honest about all of this. And then to Lisa and Dee, thank you for giving your expertise to our session. We're actually going to be wrapping up our units on the board next week. So Kaylin put down our topics there. And then we're into a lot of other world around legal issues and management and leadership and a bunch of other stuff. So feel free to share it with your networks. Other than that, please stay safe. And it's been a pleasure seeing you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Best of all.
Bye.